Hello, fellow sauce, and welcome to episode 45 of Knowing You Know Nothing. It feels weird because I just recorded an episode last night with one of our guests today, so it feels like we just finished one and we're about to do another one, but this will be for the following week. Before we start today's show, I just want to say that this is going to be our second roundtable episode, something that we really enjoyed after the last one, and I think that I'm going to do these more often. Our last one was episode 43, which you can find on all the other social media or podcast outlets. And we just recently got added to Spotify. So if you can find any of our past episodes as far as that stuff goes. So the last episode was 43. We covered what was the value of a human life. That was a really deep kind of episode. Today was one that's very abstract and could really go anywhere. It could be sports related, education related, life related, economically, really anywhere, because the question for today's prompt is competition good? I decided to mostly pick teachers this time. So we're waiting on one of our other guests with technical problems to come back in. But once he's back in here, we're going to have about 5 teachers in the conversation. So just to introduce all the guests, and then we'll get started. Cody, I'm going to use you first. Cody was on the episode last night. He's done 8 of them now, and this will be number 9. So I'm sure Letha Page will be really happy that Cody will be in the lead on the number of episodes that's been done. So it's my girlfriend will be real happy about that. But Cody has just finished up the episode over the movie No Country for Old Men, and I was really excited about that. I got a lot of really good ideas from another guest of mine named Zach Simpson. His good friends from the Real Talk movie podcast, they really gave me some good ideas about what to bring up in that episode. So that's another podcast. If you're a listener of this one, please go check out Real Talk, a movie podcast. Gabe, Tommy, and Wes are hilarious, and they're very informative. And, you know, Zach put up with them for years, and they put up with him. So it's really cool to meet those guys and work with them. But going back to Cody, he's been on so many different types of episodes. And that's probably the thing I want to ask you, Cody. So first of all, thanks for being on the show. But I guess, what is it like to really do such a weird kind of cornucopia of topics? Because you've probably done a vast array of different topics than anybody else has in this episode. So Cody, what's it like to be back?
Well, it's great to be back. I very much enjoy doing these episodes, especially a diverse interval of topics. And I'm so glad that you brought me on so many times. I know Miss Page is too, but I'm very glad to be back, and I'm very excited to discuss this topic with all of you.
Great. And Cody, like I said, I always like your philosophical insight, because you and I are just about, I think you're even more at a higher level academically with philosophy than I am now after some of your college classes. Just for our listeners, a little bit of a background. Again, Cody is a major in mathematics, and he goes to Murray State University. I always like his insight. I feel like Cody's the logical one that keeps me grounded, because I get all obsessed with metaphysics and whatnot all the time, or morality, and Cody brings me down to earth. Going to another guest, a former colleague of mine. He's still in an educator, and he teaches up in northern Ohio. I think that's what it is. I can't remember. You're right there on the border of Indiana, Ohio, but I'm pretty sure you're still in Ohio. His first podcast ever was last week, and he did the first roundtable episode over the value of a human life. And I want to welcome back Nathan Davis. Nathan, how's it feel to be back?
It feels good. Like I said, I think the first podcast that I did there was definitely a success for myself. And this might become a hobby for me.
Yeah, maybe, man. I think that you're going to be a natural. As you and I talked after the episode last week, it's weird because you kind of get more used to them all the time. And now that we're all doing distance learning so much, it's like we're all going to become Zoom experts in time, and a podcast is really no different. It's just it's being recorded on audio too. A new guest of mine, so I'm gonna go to, she had just recently became a colleague of mine. It became official within just the last couple of weeks. This is her first podcast of all time. I think she also attended Murray State, if I remember correctly, and she can correct me if I'm wrong. She's a major in social studies education as well. She's taught, well, I guess in the big scheme of things, you've taught 2 years kind of already.
Yeah, kind of.
School for your student teaching. So she's entering her 3rd year as a teacher, and she's going to be a colleague of mine. We'll be teaching the same world history class together. But I really wanted to get her involved in the podcasting, because we're about to do a lot of educational podcasts really soon on our teaching YouTube channel together. So I look forward to having her. So this is Maegann Basham. How's it feel to be on the show, Maegann?
Hey, I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to get to talk about competition, one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, of all the players that I coached back in the day with the earbuds there, well, you were definitely one of the most competitive, young adults that I've ever had a chance to actually be around. You were a nice person, but because sometimes people hear competitive and they think automatically they're basically a jerk to be around. But again, I would never say that about you, Maegann. So thank you for investing your time from that. And then our last guest, at least for now, until Bill Murphy is able to make it into the podcast, is a gentleman that I've also been friends with since I was a kid, another fellow educator. And he was also recently on the podcast, The Philosophy of Woodworking with Sam Kessler. And I appreciate having him back on. So Zach Simpson, also fellow educator, fellow head coach. I couldn't wait to get your personal feedback on the topic of competition tonight. How's it feel to be back again?
Yeah, it feels great. I'm probably one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. I mean, these people on this podcast that know me, that know how competitive I am. I think it speaks volumes of the profession that I went in. So I'm excited to talk about how competitiveness can be good or bad tonight. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and that's Zach. It's a good place to start on there because you mentioned how competitiveness can be good or bad, and I think that's why I purposely made the question argumentative by structuring as is competition good, and even though we are all aware that that something is good or bad can be rather subjective or relevant. So this is probably the most awkward and the most difficult part of the entire podcast, which is really like a jump ball in basketball. I'm just going to toss it up in the air, and I'm going to let one of you four just take it and get started. As Zach can attest, it's very hard for me to keep my mouth shut most of the time. So my job during this roundtable is really just the devil's advocate as much as I can. So I really just want to listen to the feedback that you all give. So I'm just going to start the question off. Whichever one of you is ready to just kind of get it started in any particular direction, I'd really appreciate that. So the first origin question of the discussion, is competition good?
Well, I think in order to answer that question, we first need to define competition, which is a question you can tackle from a bunch of different perspectives. You can tackle that economically or biologically or related to athletics or mathematically or any kind.
I think you go into also, you actually look up the actual definition of competition. And like I said, I was always taught that when you do a definition, you don't use the actual word in the definition. If you look at every dictionary that I've tried to look up, it says it's the act of competing. So really, is there really a true meaning to competition? And like I said, with competition being good, and certain instincts and also aspects where you're coming from can be good, but then also that being good, it can be used against you by all means.
I think that, I'll speak from a teaching standpoint, something I tell my kids all the time, that's life as a competition. This life we live, the economy that we are, involved in, it's all competitive. I tell them all the time, you may get a certificate for participating, but I promise you there's not going to be 5 or 6 people that get the job that you're going to apply for unless there's 5 or 6 openings. So I always tell my kids, what are you going to do to stand out? What are you going to do to invest in your human capital? What are you going to do to stand out over the competition? Because in reality, that's what a job is. When all of us applied for teaching jobs, I'm sure there was a spot open, and we had to prove, why did we deserve that? So we were in competition with everybody else. So in a way, that's the good part of it. So that's something that I tell them all the time. Just always understand that life's a competition, and the more that you're able to be put in those situations growing up, the more prepared you're going to be for it.
And I think kind of building on that, competition really pushes people a lot of times, good competition, to try and be the best that they can at something. Like you said, building their human capital, making themselves, stand out. If everybody is striving to do that, then everybody's trying to push themselves to be, the best that they can possibly be at whatever it is.
Right.
Well, it was interesting
Absolutely.
where you guys started at. Cody, you had brought up, I like how you started at defining competition, but the subject of the word competition, and Nathan brought up this great point. If you look at all of the possible definitions, which I think there's 3 or 4 of them, not one of them implies that it is either good or bad. So competition in itself is neither of those things. It's neutral. And then Zach brought up education. I'm glad that he took that route. So I do have a devil's advocate question for all 4 of you. I know only 3 of you are teachers, but Cody, you might as well be a teacher, man. I'm pretty sure you can get up and probably teach some of those math classes or whatnot. So I want to ask from a student standpoint for Cody or teacher for you guys, as far as competition goes, some teachers believe in rewards, whether it be candy or it could be a reward. And I guess, other than just a grade. I know a grade is still kind of a reward. So let's just say something that's a tangible reward, whether it's money or candy or food or whatnot. Can giving rewards to students in education, does that increase competition or does that decrease competition over time?
Go ahead, Cody. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm still thinking.
Well, and that's something that I've told too, is that to me, a reward, you're talking about competition, you talk about, capitalism and it's competition, and money is your ultimate reward for life. But in the classroom or just in anything, a reward, if you tell somebody they're getting a reward, it's like bribery. You're like bribing them. Okay, please do this. Here's what you're going to get this. It's almost like an old psychology situation. So when I do is if I give a reward, my kids don't know it's coming. So I think that, to me, that means more. So because then you're doing it for the integrity purpose, as opposed to, and you know what you're going to get. Now, does it motivate some people? Yeah, because from a young age, we are our parents. If you're good, I'll give you this. If you're good, I'll give you that. But at the same time, we have to learn to do something that for the good, the common good, or the good of society. So it could be good and bad, but my kids know that the rewards are going to come when they're not expecting.
So what's more effective would you say that negative reinforcement is more effective than positive punishment? And I'll define those 2 terms. Negative reinforcement would be, rewarding someone by taking something away, like taking pain away, or maybe taking away a really loud noise. Whereas positive punishment would be like inflicting pain or giving something to the kid that they don't want.
Well, I think it really depends on the kid. Because to me, you're a direct product of how you're raised. So, that this very small percentage, you can change the way you think and the rewards that you get. But, if you're brought up on positive reinforcement, then that's our job, is to get it really kind of figure out what motivates them the best, I guess, so to speak. So, to me, that's a great question, Cody. It all just really depends on the kid and what officially motivates them. Now, if you ask me which one I think is better, I don't think either one really tops the other one. I think it just depends on the kid itself, so, or the adult for that matter.
So I have a question for Zach, wondering anything about that reward. If you're saying that the unexpected reward, that it's better in that situation. Mm-hmm. Can a reward be something we know as our given definition of a reward commonly for a human person is saying that it's going to either be an advantage to me or I'm going to get that. But is there such a thing as a reward of being being a failure where you learn from that mistake with the competition?
That's a good question. Yeah, because I think failure is part of life. And I think that, if you're, again, it goes back to, if you're taught that failure is a good thing and you learn from failure, then it can be. Yeah, absolutely. But if you've never failed at something or you're consistently bailed out, then no, that's not going to be a reward. That's going to constantly be a negative thing in your life. But if you're raised as it's a positive thing, failure is, then yeah, absolutely, it can definitely be a reward.
Yeah. That goes back to the question also with what Cody was asking about that. I think you said negative reinforcement or positive and all that stuff. And like you said, it's all, a lot of it is where you're being raised, what you think, you was raised. And I guess a lot of it goes back to the mental side. I mean, really, it's all about the mental side, what side you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I've only coached for 1 year, and it was 5th and 6th graders, so I don't have a ton of experience in that regard. But one thing I do know is, like you said, students and kids and adults are all motivated differently. So I had some kids on my team who, you know, if they weren't giving effort, they weren't hustling, it was like a pat on the back. Come on, like, you can do it. You can do better than this. Like, it's okay. It was very encouraging, positive. And then there were other kids, whenever I played, I reacted better to a little bit harsher wording, like, come on, get your rear in gear. That was how I responded better. And maybe that's because it's how I grew up, like, very competitive family. But I think coaching is a huge aspect of it. It's just what makes each player tick.
So would you consider yourself a friend to the students you coached?
Friend?
I see the puzzle look on your face, so I'll elaborate a little.
I don't have them on Snapchat, like, we're not hanging out on the side. But
I don't mean that. I mean in the sense that Aristotle defined friend, or sorry, not Aristotle, Epictetus, who defined a friend as someone who would do anything to make you the best version of you that you can be. And in turn, that would make the friend the best person that they could be.
I think so. I mean, I loved all of my kids. I mean, really, really. And I want best for all of them in the long run. And I want to be a positive influence to help them get to the best that they can be. So if that's the definition, absolutely.
I'll take a crack at that, just coming from the coaching aspect. Like I said, I've coached, ever since I've been 18. Previously, a couple of years ago, I took a overhead coaching position. As coaches, I know when I was kind of going through the coaching world of college, high school, junior high, was just the aspect of saying that we're not, as coaches, we're not friends. But once that practice is over or the game is over, we'll do anything for our players. And to get to that point, like when you said about the kind of the definition of friend, you could put it as saying we are friends because in today's society, we feel like our best friend will tell us the truth no matter what. Hopefully, And I think that goes back to truth. And is that positive reinforcement, negative? It all depends the way you take it. But as a friend, a coach hopefully tells you the truth, because really every human being is really only worth the truth. Because if you get a false, really false thought, we don't know if you can make it or not. But with the truth, though, it gives you at least a boundary line of what, at least a goal or what you can reach to it. So that's kind of where my thought comes from, that friend title.
I'm waiting for one of you to go. Okay, I'll jump back in. All right, so I do want to add up on the friendship thing a little bit, because to the average listener, taking the route of a friend topic might be veering too far off of our origin question, but it's actually not. Now, I got kind of quiet there because I was trying to research a book that Cody and I had read this last year that I recommend you all to read at some point, which is by Jordan Peterson, called The 12 Rules for Life. I'm trying to see the one that involves about friendship. Here it is. Yeah. Okay. So chapter 3 in the book, the title is Make Friends with People Who Want the Best for You. So if the question is competition good? I think of some of the people in my life that I've been the most competitive with, Zach being one of them. We grew up playing basketball together all the time, video games together. It doesn't matter whatever it might be, but sometimes some of your best competition is your friends. But now this is where I'm going to call this out to you guys. So Nathan, I'm going to throw this back at you, but anybody else can take it too. Isn't it also the job of a true friend to hold you accountable for your actions and to want what's best for you, like truly what's best? Therefore, along the topic of friendship, I mean, I would say competition is still good there, because there is a competition in a way that not necessarily good or bad in itself, but that for your friendship, the friend themselves wants you to be better than what you were before, or you to be responsible for your actions. So theoretically, Nathan, does Cody's original question about friendship, whether Maegann was a friend or not as a teacher, in Epictetus's description of a friend, because like I said in the chat, Epictetus also defines a friend as someone that helps others through adversity. And as Nathan followed up, a coach does that on the court, but especially off the court. You help deal with adversity through that way. So Nathan, do you think that friendship is still, I guess, relative to the topic of competition being good?
I think so, because hopefully that when you do have competition against your friends, because, and as everybody else, I like I said, knowing personally Maegann there for 5 years or so, and knowing Zach, knowing Robbie, you have this inner fire of competition that you do want to beat that other person by all means, even though it's your friend. But hopefully that in return, I guess it's more like a joint agreement when you become a friend, hopefully that when you're playing them or whatever competition happens, that they're also competing at the same level as you. And in that situation there, it's going to come out better just because of everybody's at the same level. Now, I mean, we'll kind of continue with this discussion, because at the end of this discussion, I'll have to bring up something else on top of that I'll just bring this up in a situation that even though your friends can compete against you, your own mental state within yourself can only compete. So I'll leave it to everybody else there.
Nathan, that's a good point, because it's really up to you as an individual intrinsically to decide if the competition is there or not. Your friend can push you, but you still have to ultimately make that decision. Nathan, I'm going to use your base argument for a question to ask Maegann something. And again, Cody, I'd love to hear your input on this as well too. Is that I guess when we were getting into something earlier about Zach had brought up, I guess, the positive reinforcement thing is good as long as it's something intrinsic in you. Like there's something that's inside of you that recognizes that you did deserve some kind of reward. And I can't remember what word he used. He used a much better word than I can even brainstorm right now. I'm having a brain fart moment, because I keep thinking of the word gratitude, but it's not that. It's more like you know inside that you deserved it, and it wasn't just that something was given to you on there. So I like where Nathan's going at the friendship thing and holding you accountable. So I guess, Maegann, going back at you, whether it's a teacher or a coach, when it goes back into rewarding things, or whether even if you look at a situation in terms of a friend like Epictetus describes, do you think that do you think that whether or not the competition is recognized within yourself as good, does that make the competition good? I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm asking? I know it's kind of a weird way that I structured that. I guess I'm trying to build up.
If I think it's good competition, that makes it good competition.
Yeah, very
Whereas
good.
if I think it's bad competition, then just kind of like my mental state.
Yeah. Even if people on the outside and your friend, like Nathan said, sees differently, but if you on the inside, whether they can see it as good competition or not, if you feel like it is intrinsically yourself, does it make it good?
I think that there are benefits to competition, for sure, whether you see it as good or bad. I have several. My sister is surprisingly competitive, but whenever she was younger, the rest of us are so outwardly competitive that she seemed like she wasn't. And so, she's a phenomenal volleyball player. Now she plays collegiate volleyball. But before she played volleyball, it was, not very apparent that she was a very competitive person. So there would be times where, we would be in competition and she would not like it. She would hate it. And to her, it was like a bad thing, because all of us were so into some board games or my family's very competitive, y'all. Pencils have been thrown across the room before for different games. I mean, it's bad. And so she would not like that. But like I said, there are aspects to competition that I do think are really good that push you and motivate you in different ways. And so even if you don't necessarily see the benefits, you could still reap the benefits without knowing it. Does that make sense? Like a student who maybe isn't comfortable with competition, maybe they're not outspoken, maybe they're not super naturally competitive. They may find themselves being pushed more out of their shell because of competition, just for an example.
You mentioned, Ms. Basham, that competition is good if you think it's good. What if the person you're competing with doesn't think it's good?
Well, I've had students who hate competition, and I love it. I try and use it in my classroom as much as possible. And I have students who are just teetotally not comfortable with it. They don't like confrontation, but I kind of make them, because like I said, even if they see it as bad, if I push them to maybe speak their mind, or I push them to participate in it, there might be positive benefits that are reaped from that. They may grow more confident in themselves, more confident in their opinions and sharing their opinions, or even just, they might be more comfortable with their classmates.
Maegann, I have a devil's advocate question that goes similar to Cody's theme. I have this for you and Zach both, and it'd be cool to hear Nathan's thoughts too. On the topic of, it may not be good for the opposing person, that the person that's competing against you, if they see it as something that's not good, is your competition still objectively good? So I'm gonna take it even further. Maegann, I'm gonna use your sister as an example, because I also taught your sister back in the day, and she is a rather competitive person, but like many of us, and I'm not just gonna use her as a vanilla template. It could be anybody. Let's say, Maegann, if you're competing against someone and you see the competition as good, once the other person is in the act of losing, like they're in the middle of when they recognize that, hey, I'm losing at this point now, could an individual argue that the competition has now become bad? That's what I'm asking you and Zach.
I think in their mind it might, because they're not winning the competition, but a lot of that I think is a lesson that, depending on the competition, but I'm thinking sports specifically, it is not fun getting your butt whooped. It's not, and you might think, this is bad, it's not fun, but it's still competition, and you learn things during the whoopings that you wouldn't have learned if you were the one, being the windshield, not the bug, so to speak.
I
Zach,
agree.
what do you think? You're go ahead, Nathan, take it.
Go ahead, Zach. Go ahead.
No, I forgot what I was going to say. I need to regather my thoughts. Go ahead.
Again, Nathan, I think you what it was, just to reiterate the question again, and Maegann had an interesting answer. It does suck to be the bug sometimes and not the windshield. I know Zach and I's high school basketball experience was a little bit too much like that most of the time back in the day. But, the question is, again, still, is if we're standing on the outside looking in, two people are competing against each other, for that person that starts to recognize that they're losing, the competition to them becomes bad. So my question is, does the competition in general become bad instead of good? Because in that competition, someone is losing.
Well, I mean, it depends on, too. I know that there's a lot of depends on stuff here, but it also depends on, too, how you take losing. Do you take it as failure? And now you're learning from failure? Because in that way, if you take failure as something to learn, and failure is not good, but at the same time, it can also be productive. Then I think it can, but I don't think it necessarily has to work both ways. I think if you're a competitive person and you're competing against someone and you're obviously winning, then it is what it is.
So here's a general question for everyone when we say that we can take it both ways with competition. So, for example, you get, say, a boxer it's an old boxer. He loses his boxing match and says, I'm done. Is that competition good or bad based on that? Because to me, when you see somebody maybe quit a sport or quit, the wrong word is passion, because passion's very, very used word that can have many different definitions. Can there be a good thing come out of a person getting out of their situation saying that if I lost a match, I'm done playing?
Well, if you ask me, that's not really competition. That's just a loss. If you ask me, competition is more of the journey. The journey is the destination, if you will. The competition wasn't what made him want to quit. The loss was, or rather, it was his decision not to get back up after the loss.
Because I'm just thinking from the aspect of you see a lot of these guys and gals retiring from sports. They've lost the edge, or they'll say they've lost the edge. And a general person that is competitive, a lot of people would consider that edge as being that competitive effort or that competitive idea. And I guess it goes back to that question, is that good or bad? Because a lot of people, I'll use for example, Shaquille O'Neal. He got out of basketball, and like I said, this is not, you can't fact check me on this one, but he could be making more money now than he was playing. But he's gotten that edge of maybe at business but not at basketball.
Nathan, I think that you're making a point that I was wondering if you guys want to eventually evolve into, and that is, how is goodness measured? So I think when you go back to the boxing example, Maegann had brought up a really good examples in the chat. I do want to read it. Maegann, if you're okay with me reading that out loud. I thought you did a great reference to basketball and a little bit of ethics tied into the philosophical discussion. You said a lot of this depends on how people act during the act of winning. Do you continue to full court press whenever you are up by 50 points as a basketball reference? Do you brag openly to your opponent's face? Would that be considered classy? Or you are winning, but is it bad competition? And finally, does the classiness of the winner change the nature of the competition? It's weird because I think it depends here, because whether it be more money by Shaquille O'Neal or that old boxer reference that Nathan did, I would come back and I would ask the old boxer, what were you hoping to gain in that? Because to go back earlier in the conversation, I'm with you, Nathan, and everybody else. We should never advocate for failure. We shouldn't strive to be ambitious to fail. However, as Zach, very eloquently pointed out earlier, you do learn something in failure. So if you gain knowledge on how to succeed better later, that actually defends Megan's point earlier. Whenever I said, if you start losing a match, does it immediately come bad? And I could use Zach's logic to say it doesn't, because in the end, if you gained more from it, that helped you win later, then that act of competition could not be considered bad, I would think, right? Go ahead, Zach.
Well, there's one, when you all talk about this, even the example they brought up, there's one word that comes to mind to me in that, I think I even said it in one of the other podcasts, Robbie, and that's patience. Because we live in a very impatient society, because we really don't have to be patient. Anything we want, we can get at the drop of a hat anymore. Information, whatever it is. Which would probably be another good topic on a podcast, Robbie, is talk about patience. I mean, it's because, okay, so I stopped playing or I stopped my sport. Is it because I've run out of patience, that I'm not getting the reward, or I'm not getting what I thought I was going to get out of it? And you see it happening quicker and quicker and quicker as time goes on, because we no longer have the attention span and patience to achieve what we're trying to do. It's almost like we expect it to come right there, but it really, and I tell my girls all the time in the game of basketball, is that, we're working right now. We're not going to see the immediate results until hopefully February or March. Can you handle that? Or are you going to be done now because you don't have the patience to wait for it? So that's when you all are talking about that, that's what comes to my mind, is that word patience. So I just want to throw that in there.
That reminds me of an example that I really like, which also references Ms. Basham's point from earlier. You mind if I give you guys a little mathematical perspective?
No,
All
go
right.
ahead.
I'm game.
So,
I can't promise I'll understand it, but
Nathan Davis is a math teacher. He's of course game.
I teach
Me and
fifth
Megan
grade,
are
so
like,
keep it
no.
fifth grade. Keep it fifth and sixth grade level.
I'll try to make this as simple as I
That
can.
level's too high for me, Zach. Go ahead, Cody.
So one of the fields of mathematics that I'm really interested in is known as game theory. And there's a famous problem in the realm of game theory known as the prisoner's dilemma. So let's say you have two prisoners. Well, for our purposes, we'll just call them Bonnie and Clyde. So the police catch Bonnie and Clyde because they suspect that they robbed a bank, and so they take them in and tell them separately, we have enough evidence to convict you both for a year. If you both confess, sorry, I'm trying to think of exactly how it was worded. If you both confess that you committed this bank robbery, then we'll put you both in prison for 5 years. If neither of you confess, then we'll put you in prison for 1 year. But if you confess and your partner doesn't, then you get 10 years and your partner gets off scot-free. So what do you think? That I'm just going to toss this out to each of you. What do you think happens?
I'm gonna let you guys take it on this one because Cody and I have discussed this before, so I'm just kind of curious on you. And Maegann asked me in the chat, didn't we talk about this in your class at some point? We did do something like this before, Maegann. It was disguised as a different scenario. We didn't use prisoners, but it was very similar.
Robbie, I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Nathan. You look like you're ready to go.
Yeah. On the story of giving like two prisoners, that is totally the top of the competition because one person is looking for reward, and that reward, it might be less time or getting off scot-free. And I guess you want to go back to it, and also me, I guess being a numbers guy, you have a 50% chance really of somebody deciding either yes or no. I'm going to tell you this, or I'm not going to tell you this. So really, in the end, when you have this competition, I guess maybe this is a question back to you on top of those two prisoners. Does each prisoner have the same chance of getting 10 years or getting off scot-free or only 1 year? That may be a question. Go back to you. Can I explain more?
Well, I'd say they do, because keep in mind that the prisoners are interrogated separately. So maybe their goal is to get off with as little time as possible, so neither one confesses. Or maybe their goal is to give their partner the most time possible. In which case, they confess to the other's crime.
I think, and you kind of got to my idea coming off this question is, do those two individual prisoners work as one? So therefore the competition is against the investigator or the interrogator. Or is the competition a three-way? Is it a three-way really tie for competition between the three individuals? Or then also you could bring up the next title of, is the competition just between the two prisoners? Who's willing to take either the step to say, because really based on that, if you want to go in the two prisoners, truth doesn't mean nothing in this situation. Is can you yourself as a prisoner, if you're against the other prisoner, can you be yourself and be compelling enough to where you're talking to that individual that is trying to investigate you and make it sound truthful. And it also goes to that standpoint there because, I mean, it's used, not saying used a lot, but if you get two people saying the same exact thing in two separate rooms, more than likely somebody will say, boy, that sounds fishy. That sounds like it's a recorded conversation. So it kind of goes back to there. And that's a great point to bring up two prisoners because that is competition. But it goes to the next level. Who is the competition against if we're saying we're competing against somebody?
And I think tying it back around to what we were talking about earlier, it also brings up motivation and friendship right there. What is motivating each prisoner? Were they friends? Are they close before this? Was it strictly business? Was one in a more leadership position? I mean, I think it just ties it all back around what motivates them and like what is their relationship built on.
Maegann, just to build off of you and Nathan, I guess this is a question going back to both of you. Nathan, you said that in this scenario, truth doesn't matter. It's so crazy that when we talk about philosophy, especially I'm a big morality guy. When I hear somebody say truth doesn't matter, I'm like, I say truth is everything. To me, I love the truth debates. But what keeps going in my head over and over in this topic is self-preservation or self-interest. So since both of these individuals are separated, I guess where the problem comes involved is if they're acting in their own self-interest, are they both doomed to fail? Like they're not going to come up with an optimal outcome that either one of them really wants if they only act as one. But as Nathan said earlier, if they both think is that they're together against, whatever it is against them to cause them to be in this dilemma, is that the ideal way? Because that's what I'm kind of throwing back at you, Nathan, because Megan's right. It does go back to friendship. What was the other one that you mentioned too?
Motivation.
Yeah, motivation, because that was one of the follow-up questions is what incentivizes competition? What motivates it and instills it in us? And we brought up the foundation that family and school and sports and all kinds of things instill competition. Hell, even maybe the basic evolutionary desire to survive is probably also in just the competition. So Nathan, just to go back to you and Maegann, in this scenario, if there is such a thing as a right answer, or at least an optimal answer that's adequate, is it what you started off with, Nathan, where if the two individuals that are prisoners, even though they're separate, if they can be as close to the same as they can, but you brought up how fishy it would be if they had the exact same outcome. But they're both trying to look out for what's best. But I guess what I'm bringing up is if they make the mistake of doing self-preservation, I think they both end up losing out, or at least one of them for sure ends up losing out in the scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, and I think you brought up a great point there about survival. Competition is survival. When you look at the long, stretch of things that, competition that what we think of is the survival of whatever aspect, game, situation that we're in. So when you start to get to the point and I guess it goes back to if the two prisoners have the same story, their survival is based on being in the same story so we can both get off scot-free. If it gets to individual wise, and this will bring up that next point that I brought up, of saying that I might bring up, competition, I think the deep of the competition is not against somebody else. It's only against yourself. And that goes back to that mentality or the mental side, and kind of go from there because, again, you have no clue. You cannot control. So for the prisoner situation, if I'm the prisoner, I can't control what he or she says. With that being said, I have now competition against myself saying, am I going to say the truth? Am I going to say this to help that person? Now I am battling myself, not the other person. And I think it goes back to the point, competition boils down to basically intrinsically that flame inside you. Are you going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? But even with that, you're just basically debating yourself when you have competition within yourself.
Cody, just want to get your thoughts on this because I know you did a great job of bringing this up and it's really stemming it. Well, what are your thoughts on the whole topic, Cody?
There's another aspect of the prisoner's dilemma that I'd like to talk about. You know, generally in game theory, you assume that one, there's no cheating in the game, and two, you generally assume that the game is only played once. But what happens if the game is played several times? What would you expect the result to be if the game is played over and over again?
With the same people, same situation.
Yes.
So for the sake of this situation, like Bonnie and Clyde have this situation,
Exactly.
and then time passes and then they're back in that same situation.
Exactly.
Oh, I think a lot of it would depend on how it went the first time.
Yeah, and Cody,
If,
does Bonnie and Clyde have knowledge of the first time,
oh, that's a good
second
question.
time,
Yeah.
and the third time? They
They
do.
do.
Maegann, I do want to know your answer. I was just curious. I just wanted to know: are these people ignorant? Do they have like a Groundhog Day effect, but without the lack of knowledge? I mean, it just keeps restarting over.
No,
It's
I'm
just
glad
kind
you
of
asked
awkward.
that. I
I mean,
assume they did, but I didn't check.
yeah.
Then I think it would just all depend on what happened the first time. If, one of them ratted, then the other one's probably really going to be thinking hard the second time around and the third time around, or however many it is.
I think also too, you bring up that point about, if the first time somebody ratted, the next time it goes back to the term survival. I'm going to survive myself because that other person ratted me out. But even though then, if they were still separate, and even though the prior knowledge is, I still think it goes back to that internal flame of debate within yourself of saying, do I keep my same answer the second time around? Do I keep it the third time around? Or do I start saying, you know what, because as anybody, it's one of those things where maybe another big discussion would be, everybody is for themselves now in society. Everybody's, every man for himself. And one of those things with that being said, if you keep repeatedly do that and prior knowledge keep going, sooner or later, you're going to start thinking of yourself because you are debating yourself. And that's kind of my thought behind that.
It's one of my favorite aspects. So I used to watch The Walking Dead a lot. And so, but in those, survival shows and the zombie apocalypses, a lot of it is, losing the human aspect versus like the survival, more animalistic instinct. Am I going to kill and attack, or am I going to try and hold on to this little bit of humanity that's left? And you see that a lot of times in some of the characters, that inner struggle, that inner competition.
Maegann, your answer is making me think of an economic term that we may or may not have to cover this year. And I come back to the term economic or opportunity cost, because in those kind of situations where you have to make a decision where there could be a little bit of good, a little bit of bad on both sides, you have to think about, I guess, in the end, what's going to have the greater good. And Maegann, because of what you brought up, I'm going to use that as an argument against Nathan. I do have, not really an argument against him, because I guess I shouldn't say that, because I don't really disagree with Nathan, but I do think this discussion, let's kind of steer it in a way of making a debate between the self and society. Zach, said this earlier. I thought it was a great chance to say it. So I think I might start with Zach this time, just to get his thoughts on it, because I thought Zach mentioned it without using the word. But if you're making these decisions and it involves competition, but the results of the competition results in the greater good, which in terms of the word I'll use in class is utilitarianism. Whatever's going to be for the greater good of society. I don't give a crap if it's two prisoners, or if it's a game, or if it's decisions in school, medical decisions, political decisions, wherever they might be. I guess, would it be fair to argue that one could determine that competition is good if it results in a utilitarian good? And by that I mean the benefit of the society as a whole. Does that make competition itself good? So Zach, I'll start with you, because you were the first one to bring up really the greater good idea tonight.
Well, I think it goes back to what Nathan said, and the fact that about yourself, you have to think that way. You have to think about, your end result. You talk about with the end in mind, your end result has to be, even though you lost or whatever it may be, your end result is, I'm okay if it's for the greater good of society or the game or whatever it is. But again, he brought up a good point, and I just got back on here. We struggle with thinking about that anymore, because it's all about me. How's this going to affect me? How's this going to do this to me? So I don't know, Robbie. It's a pondering thought, but I don't know. It's hard to explain.
I'm not I don't know how you would say it, utilitarian. I'm not I don't know. I took the test that you posted and it did not come back great as far as
What
results.
score did you get out of 60?
Oh, I don't even remember, but I remember.
Feel better, Maegann. I got an 18 out of 68. So like you, I'm also not a very utilitarian person.
But I think about my husband Ryan. We just finished watching the Maze Runner movie series, and I think about the competition inside the maze of survival. You are having to survive, and all that. And I know it's fiction. I'm just using this as an example. It's very, I don't want to say far out there, but compared to basketball, it is. But they were being put through so many different things that they had to just survive, and the ones that survived, they won. Congratulations, you get to live. And we're doing this for the greater good of society to try and come up with this cure for this disease. So does that make it right that these kids were put through what they were put through because it was for the greater good of society? We're trying to find a cure for everybody. Does that make it okay? This being put through. But like I said, I'm not a utilitarian.
Yeah, no, it's good. I love your. Go ahead, Nathan.
I mean, it brings up, and this is the same topic. Just from the coaching aspect of me researching a lot of coaches that have what we consider to be successful in the past. I've learned a lot through coaching and seeing a lot of coaches that were successful. You have to improve yourself for the betterment of the team. And if you can bring your aspect to the team, in theory, it should make a better team. But it goes back, it kind of goes back to the topic, as a coach, and since we have, 4 coaches and even on the aspect of school or anything else, is the betterment of the team good? Because we know as coaches, for the betterment of the team, we know that everybody is not successful at that given time. But if our team wins, we know it's good, but we still might have certain aspects of individuals maybe did not have a good game, and vice versa.
Go ahead, Cody.
That reminds me of a great bit of advice I was once given. Mr. Malkinson, you'll remember this. I was once told to read history as if you're the perpetrator, not as if you're the hero or if you're the victim. Read history as if you are the villain, because then not only will you see the capacity for evil within groups, but you'll see the capacity for evil within yourself, which, if you ask me, is far more terrifying. So, and you mentioned coaches have to better themselves before they can better the team. Do you think you have to understand your capacity for ability before your capacity for goodness, or the other way around, or are those two even mutually exclusive?
It's a great point. Great point. I guess let me clarify, to see what your question is asking, is basically, as a coach, am I supposed to better myself than say that if I had 10 girls that were straight athletic that could play the game whatever, and I could just sit on the bench and just sit there and say, go play the game. Is that kind of what you're kind of asking, basically, the comparison of that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All I can say is great question. But I think as a coach, you always have to be better yourself in whatever aspect, because whatever individuals come through your program, every individual is different. It kind of goes back to Coach Simpson's point. Everybody's different. A way they take emotion, is emotion part of the game? Some coaches think that you need to have a straight face and show no emotion until the end. Try to keep your composure. I think a lot of it is on top of that whole topic. As a coach, you got to have a better understanding of your players. You got to have a better understanding of how to give that information out to your team. So really, I think to answer your question, I don't think those are really equal. I think it goes more the way of you have to better yourself in order to better the team.
Nathan, to build off of Cody's question, this is for you and Zach. I know Maegan's just really now starting her coaching career over the last couple of years, so she may not have been exposed. But whether we were as athletes or players, I think that we've all been exposed to this at some point. To build off of Cody's original question, if I understand Cody correctly, he used the whole read history from the point of view of the perpetrator, so you know that you're capable of evil just as much as you're capable of good. So let's go back to the good and bad of competition. So Nathan as a coach, Zach as a coach, Maegann as a coach, do you have to have awareness and knowledge of what is bad competition and what is good competition in order to have a better understanding of how to reach good? Okay, to have good competition more than often, do you need to know what both of those are? Let me give you an example. Back in the day, the time whenever we used to play high school basketball, I remember Zach and I had this experience in high school. So some coaches here and now, you'll hear a story come out where the coach still does the famous loose ball drill in practice. Some coaches do something where they tie something to the net or the rim, and they have girls and guys fight over it. They literally, you're basically fighting each other in practice. Now, the risk of injury skyrockets. So you're teaching, you could be arguing that the good competition is you're teaching toughness, perseverance, whatnot. Bad competition could result in a season-ending injury or something like that. So in order to truly understand whether the competition as a coach is good or it is bad, do you need to have, as a coach, do you need to have knowledge of what both of those look like? So do you two both know what a good example of a drill in practice would be to never ever do, and you also have knowledge of drills that you should do more often than not?
Well, I mean, we always start every practice out with a drill called war, and my girls love it. I mean, the ultra competitive ones love it. Now, you would really think that, you think of what the name of the drill is, and you're thinking, well, what in the world is it? Well, it's a war rebounding drill where we put three girls underneath the hoop, and we tell them no hard fouls, no injuries, anything like that, but that we want them to learn to finish in contact. We want them to learn to finish and go up. So they have to score 3 baskets total before they get out, and the next person steps in. And then if you're still in there when a girl hits 3 buckets, your score goes back to 0. So you can end up being in there the whole entire time if you don't show toughness. Now, one would argue that maybe not, but at the same time, my girls love it, and that's something that we start every practice with. They're like, Coach, we're ready to go to war. We're ready to go to war, because I always tell them. I tell my team, I'm going to war with you. We're going to war against the other team right now. I'm going with you. So we started out at the beginning of every practice for that. So,
coming from my aspect, like I said, of competitiveness, I guess the physical thing of, I'll just say this: I do not do the loose ball drill in my practice.
I did it one day. I did it one time, and I saw my girls dive on the floor. I said, we're never doing that again.
I feel like we did it a lot whenever I used to love that drill. Like, maybe I'm just weird. I don't know, but
no, I remember as a player back when I played with Zach on the same team, we all loved it. We loved playing anything
Yeah,
like
but you gotta teach them. You gotta teach them how to dive on the floor.
Mhm.
Some people just fall. They just
They
fall
just
on the
fall down.
basketball.
It's like knees first or elbows first. Zach, I will
Yeah.
say, I don't want to take Nathan's answer, but Zach, your war strategy, I could still argue ethically, at least your drill is within the realm of the game. There's strategy within the game of rebounding and working together. You're not, and you're also giving it precedent not to foul each other hard. But what we're seeing, sometimes you see stories of coaches that don't even use a basketball. They'll use some other kind of object or just throwing it along the floor. And like you said, Zach, if you don't give them the proper knowledge of how to dive correctly, you may be getting yourself into a very problematic situation as a coach. Yeah. And even though you're trying to teach toughness, you may be biting off more than you can chew off of that.
Yeah.
And Nathan, I didn't want to. I'm sorry to intercept right in the middle of what you were trying to say there.
I think it brings up, kind of what I was going to say is, as a coach, I've kind of learned you can reduce injuries, but you cannot avoid them, if that makes sense. And kind of with that topic alone is, I try to, prepare my team to say, if the ball's on the ground, we have to do what we need to do in order for that goal to say we need to be successful on the court. Now, I do believe that for Coach Simpson is basically saying you do got to teach the girls if the ball's on the ground. And a lot of people would probably say, "Man, that's crazy. You got to teach a girl how to dive on the floor or how to fall on the ground." But as anything else, and now there's a science behind everything now. And
well, not just girls. I mean, you got to teach guys that too. Guys don't know how to do it either.
I totally agree. But then, it kind of goes back to saying, hopefully, if you teach those girls those aspects, it might take the fear from them, because you see every game that you go to, you see that one player possibly that could have dove on a ball but didn't, or throw their body out there, if you want to say it in a term, throw their body out there for the team, get that ball. But yet again, though, hopefully that of teaching how to dive on a ball and taking, because I tell them all the time, my girls, it's going to hurt. There's going to be some pain behind it. But hopefully and it goes back to the reward will be better in the end. And it goes back to Coach Simpson's, whole topic of being patient. That one diving on the ball on the floor could change the outlook of the game, but you never know until the end of the game if that's going to change it. And that's kind of being patient with what you needed to do for a common goal of the team. Yep.
That's the main idea of Western culture, isn't it? Pick up your suffering, be the one who can take all the suffering onto himself and bear it. Yeah, bear your cross.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely. I mean, it kind of goes, if you can better yourself, you're going to get for the betterment of the team. And again, though, that goes back to also the hustle aspect that there has got to be one common goal. And I know somebody brought up, in the chat about the leadership. I think, Maegann, you brought that up about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You got to understand your employees or people underneath you, because if you don't understand them, everybody can't go in that same direction of where you need to go to. So I think that's all the same aspect of somebody's going to have to do something for the betterment of the group.
And tying it back into some of those drills in practice, not only does it take away the fear, but by teaching the players how to dive on the floor, when they do it in a game, they, maybe minimize the risk of injury because they know how to do it correctly. You've taught them the basic fundamentals of this is how to dive on the floor. This is how to take a charge. Make sure you tuck your chin, because otherwise you will get a concussion. But you have to practice it. You can't just say, well, theoretically, this is how you do it. If you don't practice it in practice at some point, it's very, very difficult for girls or boys or players or whoever just to go out and just do it.
Yeah.
Great point, Megan. I like it because I kept thinking there that whether it's a basketball sense or anything else, I would think that more knowledge of something could help potentially prevent the bad that could happen because there is awareness. I have a question that I probably should save it for the philosophy of coaching, in which I hope to have Nathan Davis and Zach Simpson back again. But I'm hoping to ask Coach McAllister that I used to work with before, and Vanderpool, and a lot of these guys that I worked with in the past, because I want to pick their brains as a coach. But this still relates to our topic. And I guess I'm trying to get in the mind of an athletic director. I always thought Zach and Nathan would probably make pretty good athletic directors in their own right too. But Zach and Nathan are more, I guess, I guess
No.
yeah,
No.
that are, yeah, Zach and Nathan are more subjects that are, I guess, at the mercy of an athletic director. So the reason why I'm getting to this for is I want to know the difference between good competition and bad competition. I've always wanted to pick the brain of two head coaches, so why not Zach and Nathan on this one? And that is how important really is strength of schedule. And as a high school coach, we can get in a college argument and all that kind of stuff in football, basketball, but let's just keep it local. So, when coaches are working with athletic directors and you guys are designing a schedule for the next year, let's pick I'm not even going to pick a name of a school. Let's just say, Zach, if your high school is a pretty good sized high school, I'm not going to say the name, but if you were given a really tiny school to play that had a very, very low quality of a team, and you're probably going to beat them by at least 20 or 30 points, and you would be disappointed probably if you didn't. Do you think it's actually bad competition to schedule that team? Or do you think teams should have like a Michigan State or Kansas sort of schedule in college basketball where it's almost like they try to make it as hard as absolutely possible on them in their non-conference before they ever make it in the main one? So as high school coaches, do you guys like a tougher schedule? And if you do, how does that benefit the team? Or do you like, I guess, a somewhat softer schedule? And is either one of those really good or bad for competition?
Well, I'll take that one if you don't mind. If you could give me 20 minutes to talk about this all day.
Yeah.
Hey,
I asked my players this question. I said, I ask them this at the beginning of every year, and I usually get the same answer, but really, do they really mean it? And I believe they do. Do you want to win games or do you want to win championships? And there's a difference. Now, obviously, you got to win games to win championships. Well, they know, and I tell my parents this at the parent meeting, at the banquet. My players and my parents know that I will not schedule anybody on our schedule that cannot beat us. I feel I would rather go 10-20 and be ready to play at the district tournament than to go 20-10 and not be prepared at all. So I will purposely schedule. Like, one of my biggest goals this year was to get us in one of the biggest girls basketball tournaments in the state of Kentucky, which is up by Louisville, and we're in it this year. And it's like we could go up. We're going to go up there and play teams that probably are going to be in the state tournament. But if we want to get there, we have to see that competition. We're never going to know what that competition looks like unless we go up there and see it. And I have full faith in my team that we're going to go up there and compete. Now, but again, I could schedule 20 wins every year. I mean 20 wins that I know we could probably beat the team. Now, could we come out and have a poor shooting night? Or yeah, absolutely, and they could still beat us. But I'm talking about teams that I know on an average night can beat us. And I always believe that. I've always believed in playing tougher opponents to get better. That's the only way you get better. And Maegann, I was the same way. When Coach Mack and I used to coach together, and even Coach Finley, when we used to coach together, I used to tell them, let's schedule tough. Now, these girls aren't going to get any better if we play teams that are constantly. It might make them feel good because they're constantly winning, and it goes back to seeing the end result. It may make you feel good at the time, but the end result's not going to be there.
I was about to say, you could see that a lot, especially like my junior and senior year. We would start out horribly. I mean, at the beginning of the season, it was rough, but then it was like after Christmas, we'd seen those teams, and after Christmas, it was like turned it on and had a much better second half.
Yeah.
Maegann, are you saying, you and Zach saying that if you do have a stronger competition, even if it's average teams compared to you, you're more likely to succeed in your district. If you're playing rivalry teams that are much more on your level, even if you start off struggling, you found that in your last 2 years in high school, you tended to do better against those other schools.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, Coach, you can correct me if you feel otherwise, but I can think of some of the teams in our district that there were years where they were very tough, and our team seemed to, especially during tournament time, rise to it. Whereas there were other years where maybe that same school was not anywhere near as talented, and players know that, and so it's almost playing down to the competition level. So you know, again, I feel like we rose to it at times and lowered it up.
Even Maegan's, I think was it your junior year we won the district? Would be Franklin? Your junior year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So even that year, you know, we weren't supposed to beat them. Nobody expected us to win, but we had played. You know, we had played tough teams. We had played competitive games, and all it took was a little bit of confidence, and they showed it. So that in that way, the competition was good. I mean, so.
Just Nathan, I know we only have audio on you for the rest of the show, which is fine. But before we go to our last regular question of the night, which is just more of an advice kind of question, Nathan, just from a coaching standpoint, how do you also feel about the whole strength of schedule importance?
The tougher the schedule, the better. And I kind of asked the same kind of question that Zach's kind of asked his girls. You know, I look at it as and I look from the remembering of putting yourself down in history. Do people remember you on a 20-0 season, or do people remember you of making a long tournament run and make it memorable? You know, it's one of those things, and that's a different aspect too to look at that. And like I said, this past year, I will put my schedule up, you know, against anybody in the area that where I live. But I can tell you from a coach that took over a program that is trying to build a program. There's certain aspects that you are trying to meet and you're trying to bring into the program. And that expectations of that competition is saying that, you know, even though that, just say, for example, for my team, we took some losses this year, but I also told the girls that that's where we want to be in the future. And that's where it's going to have to take certain aspects, expectations, training and practicing to get to where we can be the dominant in the area. Because that really true, that's where I want my program to go to, is to where we are dominant in the program, that even when you step in the gym, that my team is going to be playing a certain way and you're going to have to compete against it.
So it almost has to be like muscle memory.
Yes.
Good point. Well, hey, we're going to kind of get close towards the end of the show. I just have a little piece of advice to ask you for. You know, early on this school year, Maegann and I are going to start off by showing the students within the first month how to do a Socratic seminar, how to properly sit in a circle, as Cody was taught by me too. Not raising your hand, not interrupting people, but being a respectful devil's advocate, those kind of things. And we always start off by asking kind of a life question first before we start bombarding them with history. Now, if I was going to use this question, which is competition good, would it be in my best interest as a teacher, in your four's opinion, that I should start off the way Cody did, where he first defined what competition is? But one thing that we did overlook, and I'm okay with us overlooking it because we're a little bit older, but I don't want sophomores to really overlook it, and that is defining what good is. I feel like maybe I should make them tell me what is bad and what is good, or at least what is the difference between what makes something bad and good, or vice versa. Would you four recommend that? Well, I guess I should say three, because Maegann and I are together in this. Would you three recommend that Maegann and I, if we were to do this question, that we should also ask the students what is good and what is bad?
Robbie, I'll give you my opinion, then I got to head off, man. Okay,
That's fine.
I got some work I got to do. I think when I used to really get into the student engagement part of teaching and knowing what engages kids. The number one thing that engages a student is what's called personal response. Them to be able to tie their own life to what you're teaching. So in my opinion, you take this or leave it, in my opinion, you should ask them what competition means to them. What is a competition to them? And then they can start drawing on all the experiences in their life where they had to compete with somebody. And then you can go into, well, how does the definition of competition, how does that relate to what you did? Was the competition that you yourself was a part of, was it good or was it bad? Why? So let them draw on their own experience first, and then that'll get them more in that conversation.
That's a much better idea than I had, Zach. And then I can scaffold them as I go through there to eventually get them to where I want them to be. And I love how you said that personal experience really is important. And again, at the age group that you teach, which I think is around 6th grade, they're really starting to develop and being able to slowly articulate the way that they feel. And sometimes it can be very difficult. As I taught middle school for a while, it can be very difficult for middle school kids to really put in the right words how they're actually feeling or what they think. The sophomores that Megan and I teach, they're getting better at doing that. And what we're trying to do is prepare them for a senior or after high school. So Zach, thanks for doing that. I woing definitely take that advice.
Absolutely.
Cody, yeah, Cody.
Hey, great. It was great. It was great talking to you guys,
lot,
Megan, Nathan, Cody, Robbie. Great talking to y'all. Have a good night.
Thanks a lot, man.
Good
I
seeing
appreciate
you.
it.
You too, guys.
Nathan and Cody, just to you guys, whichever one wants to take it first. Same question to you. Do you agree with Zach? And if you do you want to add anything on top of what Zach says as far as maybe the strategy that Megan and I should approach to this?
I think you definitely should ask your sophomores how they define good and what exactly is a measure of good, because they might define it as good for them, good and as far as developing their character. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and say this. Character, the word character comes from the Greek word, which literally means a stamping tool or a tool used to make a mark on something. Because every action you perform impacts your own personality and your own character. And so your character is more embodied by what you do than what you say. What you believe is more evident from what you do and rather than what you say. Because, and relating that back to competition, that's why I'm convinced that competition is good, because no matter what happens, your character is always impacted, and most of the time that's for the best.
Thanks, Cody. That's awesome. I'm going to definitely take that in. I do think it's important to focus on the character development and also how that is measured. Nathan, over to you. The same question on this is, should good and bad be something that we focus on, building off of what Zach and Cody said?
I think you do, but kind of maybe an aspect that you might want to think about is just the way of asking the questions. You could definitely tell the kids and write down on a piece of paper saying, hey, what is good to you? And then just like with Zach's aspect, he could ask the same question saying, what is based on your real life experience, what is good? And you could very well get two different answers from the same person. So basically maybe the organization of the questioning of, where is your scaffolding going to be basically on which avenue you want to take. And I think you're going to get a lot of stuff if you can be more personal with each individual of deciding that questioning and also getting those answers. I think you'll get a better response overall and also more discussion by the end of the discussions, because you're going to start thinking, everybody's going to start thinking individually. And if other people start hearing other stories, it might be creating a thinking process for other people to say, I never thought about that. So I think it's definitely the way of the questioning that you do is going to be a big help for you.
That's a good point, Nathan. And that's something that Maegann and I are obviously concerned with. When you first started teaching with me, that's when I really started the Socratic seminars back when I had Maegann as a student. And as a teacher now, both of us want to do whatever it takes to facilitate the best overall discussion. And like you said, Nathan, it really does matter to consider how we're asking questions and in what way can we do the discussions that's going to keep it going and keep it developing, and forcing kids to really have those light bulb moments where they're like, I didn't really think about that. And I've been fortunate enough over the years to have more often than not those kind of results. And sometimes it's the students that surprise you the most that will come up to you later or in front of everybody. They'll say, wow, I didn't even think about that. And it really changed their mind on that way. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for just now. We're going to take just a quick break for this little kind of promo that I'll do on here. And we'll be right back for the last segment of the Thoughtful 3 Questions. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our last segment, which has been something that's been new for about a month. This is our Thoughtful 3, and what I'm going to do is I picked 3 questions from the book Consider This, Questions That Make You Think by Barbara Ann Kipfer, and this is a book that I've often used as a teacher. These are 3 questions that I randomly picked that Maegann, Cody, Nathan had no idea that I was going to pick, and it's kind of a fun way to do a really quick version of like popcorn philosophy at the very end of this, and just kind of getting their thoughts, and they may or may not be on topic with what we discussed tonight, but I think it's still a cool way of doing it. Since I do have 3 guests left, I'm going to throw one at each of you and just kind of see how it goes. So what I'll do is, Cody, since you're more of the veteran, I'll let Maegann and Nathan see you go first. And here's the thing is, once Cody answers it, Nathan and Maegann, if either one of you want to add something that Cody says to that question, by all means, go. You can take that one. So Cody, do you feel ready for your first thoughtful question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my question for you, good sir, is how do we know that our behavior is ethical?
How do we know that our behavior is ethical? Well, first you have to define ethical, because in your class we typically related ethics to morality. But if you ask me, ethics is far more broad than morality. Ethics could be following a set of rules put in place by your employer or the teacher or your superior. So obviously, if you're following the rules they set forth, then that's considered ethical.
Good point, Cody. And as you mentioned earlier in your answer, this is a rather broad topic. It's kind of difficult because we have yet to really do a full podcast over morality and ethics in general, and that much on justice. There's many different avenues. But I think for a very short, quick kind of answer, I think you did a great job, Cody. I think you handled your own. So on to Maegann. Are you ready? So Maegann, your thoughtful question. Oh, I guess I should ask. I'm kind of being rude. Maegann, do either you or Nathan, do either one of you have anything to add to his question about how do you know when you're being ethical? Do either one of you want to say anything to that, or are you ready for number 2?
It's based on what you was raised with and what was being right and wrong.
Got it. Maegann, do you want to do anyone? Social studies lens?
As far as with this question?
Yeah, the how do you know if you're being ethical?
I think you answered it very well. But like I said, or building kind of what on Coach Davis said, you can follow the rules of a workplace or something like that, but they may not necessarily be what you consider ethical. So some people might break the rules of said place, or maybe in a country, maybe a law that they might think unethical, and break that law. I don't know. Just like he said, a lot of it's very personal.
I agree, Maegann. And sometimes if you look back in history, it gets even more murky. I mean, as a former U.S. history teacher, it seems like in the media you hear that debate brought up sometimes about Thomas Jefferson. People mostly bring him up, but it's really a lot of the forefathers. So Jefferson owning slaves at the time, by law, it was legal, but obviously today's standards, it would be considered unethical. So one could argue that it may or may not be fair to judge Thomas Jefferson and other slave owners on whether it was ethical or not, because at the time, if you're only going by the law of ethics, you could argue that he was acting within an ethical realm. Or we could say that there's ethics of humanity that transcend whatever law decided or allow. It gets
1930s.
yeah, there you go. It gets really murky. So again, Maegann, this question, I've always liked it because it seems very simple. It may not always be, but it's worded very simple. So Maegann, you're the first one to tackle it. The question is, how can we know when we are right?
Oh, I'm always right. So that's an easy answer. I'm just kidding.
Ryan, let's say Ryan
Yeah.
has to say yes to the question.
I'm just
too,
kidding.
your husband.
I don't know. It's one thing that I feel like I've been trying to teach a lot is in my classrooms, are that is anybody ever really 100% right? And a lot of that, you and I have talked about, history being from the lens of a specific group of people or person. Is it right? Is it true? Can you define what is right? Is it right for you? Is it right for me? So I don't really think that there's any way someone can be right, because there's always something that can contradict or a different perspective you can look at.
Good job, Maegann. You survived it. That was a great answer, too. And to be honest with you, Maegann,
thank you.
this is going to be sad for Bill whenever he listens to this later. If Bill Murphy was in here, he usually comes in with a theological perspective because he's a part-time pastor or preacher, I think, too. But this is where, Maegann, you have a good point. And when you get into moral relativity, that's when it gets really frustrating and murky. And one could argue that this is where religion is an attempt to alleviate moral relativity. It's like if you have an objective God that says it is good or it is bad, then it is objectively good or bad. I think I remember having that argument with Cody and John several times that last time he was with me in school. It was an interesting one to take. And I'm sure we'll tackle that in the future. So on that particular question, Cody or Nathan, do either one of you want to add to what Maegann said as far as how do you know when you're right?
It reminds me of a question I've been asking you. I've been asking myself quite a lot, and one that I recently asked you, Mr. Malkinson. Are we really equal? Because I believe that we're all created equal and that we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. But I don't think that means we're all equal. I think to say that we're all equal would mean that I believe in equality of outcome, and I don't. I believe in equality of opportunity. And the book of Romans, the epistle of Paul to the Romans, states that God is not partial to anyone, whether he be a Jew or a Greek or anyone. But that doesn't mean, but I don't think that means he treats them all equally. Now, is that right? Yes. I don't think we're all meant to be treated the same way.
No, Cody, you gave me an idea for a future
Make us who we really are.
Yeah, Cody, you gave me an idea for a future roundtable. Can inequality be right? And it depends again on what the metaphysics of inequality is, and maybe even epistemology for that example. Nathan, same to you. Do you have anything you want to add? I mean, I know obviously Cody is a mathematician, but also you as a math teacher, Nathan. I'm sure that you could argue to Maegan's statement earlier about that nothing may not ever be right. I guess in a logical, mathematical way, you could say it is either right or wrong. But is there anything else that you would want to add to the topic of how do you know when you're right?
Well, yes, you could say in mathematical, it's mathematically it's right or wrong, but also too, if you get deep enough in mathematics, there can be two answers to one question. There can be more than one answer for a problem. So again, I agree with Maegann there, especially in today. with social media and so many different aspects of life now, who is right? If it works, we consider them right. If it doesn't work, okay, you're wrong. And that's really what it's getting to. But like I said, there is not one answer will fit every question, or every question will fit every answer.
Where's my lucky coin?
Yeah. No, Nathan, it's good because that uncertainty, you think of the fake news culture, the cancel culture movement, these things. There's so many dissenting opinions on the media today. I mean, to just take the coronavirus alone, you have some videos of doctors saying it is a threat and some saying it's not. Some data says it is, some data says it's not. And you have different networks all tug a war on each other. And the psyche of the average American is trying to watch whatever local or national news they pick, and they just must feel extremely confused and extremely torn on where they get their news at. And it's hard, as a history teacher, Maegann and I have a responsibility to tell these kids, you need to be knowledgeable and you need to pay attention to the news. But what the hell are we supposed to say to them whenever we don't even trust the news? And what news should be trusted? And so it's hard because in a world full of so much misinformation, you don't want to steer the kids into getting more information that's not trustworthy. So instead, it's Maegann and I's job, I think, of just throwing different sources at them, and some that are purposely manipulated, and teaching them how to find strategies of manipulation and misinformation and those kind of things. Because to be honest with you, we're all in this for ourselves in a way. Like, we all have our own individual battle that when we look up something on media, when we see a post on Facebook, we have to determine ourselves if that is trustworthy or not. You got to go vet it. You got to go do your homework. If you really want to share it or whatnot, then you have a moral responsibility to make sure that it's true before you start sharing something. Okay, Nathan, I hope that you're ready going into this. This is the last question. I think you're really going to like this one because you brought up the word truth earlier. So I thought that this would be perfect for you to start with, and then we'll finish with Maegann and Cody. So the question is, Nathan Davis, when is honesty not the best policy?
Great question, Robbie. To be quite honest with you, of way I try to live my life, and it goes with maturity by all means, because this question can be differently at different ages. But I think the truth, I guess, if you really want to be like comical about it, the truth shall set you free. In that aspect there, because as an individual, if I don't say the truth, I'm going to have guilt within inside. If I say the truth, I should have no guilt because I am telling you the truth. So it kind of goes back to my answer to this question is no, I don't believe there's a situation that is for the good to lie for the betterment of yourself, or even to lie.
Great answer. I wish I could see your face while that answer was going. It would have been great. Maegann, over to you. Nathan Davis decided to change up his answer and almost answered a different question entirely, because he's just saying straight up, I don't even think there is a situation in which honesty is not the best policy. And he makes a good argument, because truth on itself, you could argue that truth alone is not bad or good. It just is. And it may be the way we use it or misuse it that makes it somewhat bad or not. So I'm not saying I disagree with Nathan, but I like how he did the little tricky game on me there and decided to answer a separate kind of a question about it. So Maegann, what about you? When is honesty not the best policy? Or as Nathan answered, is honesty ever not the best policy?
Man, it just gets so tricky whenever, I ask Ron, does this outfit make me look fat, or do I need to change it? Man, I just don't know if I really want I mean, really, truly, when someone asks that question, do they want honesty? And there are times, yes, like I tell him, he always says, no, honey, you look beautiful. And I tell him, like, I don't really trust your opinion right now, because you would tell me I look beautiful no matter what. But then I have, people like my mother, on the other hand, who 100% will shoot me straight. Yeah, you don't need to wear that. It does not look good on the thighs, or stomach area, or that's not your color. She will be flat honest with me 100%. So and I know this. So a lot of times it just kind of depends on if I want the truth or not. Like, do I ask Ryan, who I know he'll make me feel good? It may not be what he thinks 100%, but it's going to make me feel, or do I FaceTime my mom and get, blasted 100%? Not that she doesn't love me, but she'll be honest about it. I don't know. I don't think individuals necessarily all the time ask questions looking for the truth. I think they ask for validation, or not even validate, but just to feel good about certain things.
That's a great point. It depends what people are asking for. Before I let Cody go, I want to do a reference because I'm a huge fan of this guide. If you guys are enjoying the philosophy a little bit, I want to recommend a guy named Sam Harris. I know that Cody and I have discussed him before too. He has a podcast called Waking Up, but he also wrote a book called Lying. And on his podcast episode, he's addressed this a few times, that he is a strict proponent of telling the truth. And he mentioned this, and Maegann, I brought this up because you reminded me of it. He even mentions about his marriage and having kids, and sometimes he will get that question from his wife or something about, do I look fat in this dress? Or friends will ask him something that they may or just be looking for validation, or just be looking for the answer that they want to hear in that way. But he argues that in the long run, you are much better off to not lie. And his logic is actually pretty interesting, because he says, in the long run, your wife or your significant other, your kids, your friends will learn not to ask Maegann a question if you're not ready for the truth. And he argues that over time. But like you bring up a good point, Maegann. From the time that we're children, you could argue from a very young age, we kind of started lying early. We may be worried about getting in trouble or whatever it is. And once you start making your bed full of lies, it's hard to kind of tear that tower down once you've built that up. But at the same time, we put so much stock and trust in the truth, but can we really stand by that? I mean, Cody, we may need to do a podcast on this. Maybe this is our roundtable discussion next week, is a focus on truth. And that might be a kind of a cool topic to hit on. So Maegann, thank you for the idea spark there. I like it. So Cody, you're the last one to go tonight. Same question. I thought Nathan and Maegann did great. The question is, again, when is honesty not the best policy?
There's a quote from the movie The Dark Knight about this. It's close to the very end when Batman says, "Sometimes the truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve their faith rewarded." So when you lie a bunch, especially when you're younger, your ability to reason starts to diminish to the point where you can't even distinguish the truth from a lie anymore. But sometimes sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve to know. Sometimes people deserve optimism, if you will, and that's why I think it's. I know you and I are a big fan of Dennis Prager, Mr. Malkinson, and he has a catchphrase: first tell the truth, then tell your opinions.
I love the Prager reference there. I mean, I told you it was just in the last couple of months I really came across Prager, especially after I saw his interview with Jordan Peterson. I really liked that interview, and I kind of started listening to PragerU and a couple of other things. But I like it. And Cody, I have to say, just like Nathan said, I didn't know we were going to get the Batman impression tonight, man. That was pretty solid, and is a cool reference. And I know Maegann referenced How I Met Your Mother, Mother Marshall's stamp of approval. So that was a cool reference to throw in there too. I'd like to mention some things that are mentioned in the chat, because the listeners don't get to see what we're saying in the chat to each other at all. But I guess nonetheless, this was a great podcast. It was another solid episode. I hope that you guys did enjoy the roundtable. This is the last thing I always do, is just a closing thoughts, where I give each of you a small little platform to just kind of say your last thoughts about the show and what did you think of being on there. So Nathan, I'll start with you. This was your second podcast of all time and your second roundtable discussion. What did you think of the topic, and what did you think of the experience with these new people that you were with?
I think it was great. Like I said, hopefully maybe I could turn this into a hobby. You never know. But, also too, with the other members on here, I appreciate your honesty, your truth. But also with that being said, as I said, the first roundtable discussion, tonight was never a debate. It was a discussion. And I really appreciate that.
And this time, Nathan, unlike the last time, there was a little bit of actual debating going on, but you make a really good point, because even if there is a little bit of a debating, it's still just a discussion, and none of us are necessarily trying to kill each other as we're going through these topics, and that's not where we want to get, because I'm just trying to get a new perspective as I log out of this particular podcast tonight. And I think that both this one and that last one we did, I think I'm definitely coming away with a deeper thought and perspective over just the topic of competition, definitely than what I did coming in. So I appreciate that, Nathan. Maegann, over to you. This is your first podcast of all time. Definitely not going to be your last when it comes to education. But as far as on knowing you know nothing, or maybe even your own someday, I always ask my first timers this. After doing one, what did you think of the experience? And would you ever be willing to come back on knowing you know nothing again?
Oh, absolutely. It reminded me a lot of a Socratic seminar. And this is, I think, the first time I've, been in a Socratic seminar since I was in your class as a freshman, without being the facilitator. And so it was just a very, very cool perspective to be able to have such great discussion, hear the different points of views, hear the different philosophical ideas behind it. And, even from coaching, learning from other coaches, and getting to hear just some tips and tricks and stuff that they have with the more experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Maegann, you said something interesting in there, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Whenever we look back at your career at Murray State, not that you did Socratic seminars, but did you do many discussions, like open discussions in general? Just because Cody this last year, he did have several, depending on what class. I know it depends on the professor, but being in a history department, did you ever have like an open discussion within class that you partook in?
Yes and no. It would be open discussion hidden behind the idea of a lecture. So,
Gotcha.
you would have the person up talking, but it would be a class discussion at the same time. But as far as a formal, sit down discussion, most of the time, no. And if there were, then there was typically a right answer that they were looking for. It wasn't open-ended.
It really wasn't open to interpretation.
And that wasn't necessarily in his history. It was more open-ended, hidden behind the lecture. But as far as education, the education half went, most of the time it was looking for.
Well, to be honest with you, Maegann, this is not dogging history, but I think that, I wonder if you and Nathan would agree, and it's nothing against Cody on this, but me and you and Nathan all had to have our fair share of education classes, like the pedagogy and Maslow's hierarchy of needs and blah, 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 blah. We've had those classes. But if there was any classes where I think you really did need a structure like Socratic seminar, a chance to kind of share out ideas, and especially interpretation, education classes should have had that. And Maegann, you imply that you never really had that. I did not have any discussion experiences until I was student teaching, and we'd had that one day a week seminar class where that was the job, is to share out your student teaching experience with other people. But other than that, there wasn't in there. Nathan, I saw that you unmuted your mic. I wanted to ask you, did you have any experiences? I doubt you probably did in math, but in your education classes at all, did you ever have any kind of an open discussion structure? And if you didn't, do you feel like that was something that may have been missing?
There's really two things that come to mind here. Like I said, the school I went to was a smaller college. So we did once a week, we had an open discussion at the end of the week after everybody came together as student teaching, basically reflection. And that's what it was. Reflection is saying, well, what worked for you, just maybe get some ideas maybe for next week. So we had that quite a bit in our education program, the school I went through. The second it'd be kind of on this topic is I had a class in college. It was called Philosophy in Baseball. And what we did is we took the baseball game and compared it to philosophy of older times, Socrates, and just try to compare it. And we had a lot of open discussion with that, because we brought in, wiffle ball compared to baseball, and, what does it give you based on the thought process and everything else. So I had that quite a bit actually in school.
It makes sense, because I remember when you first started teaching with me, I think it was your first teaching job. I remember being relatively surprised by how easily you would sit down and entertain me on these discussions, especially coming from a math background. But now it's not as surprising. Maegann, you also wanted to add something in there.
Well, I feel like I should add, we did quite a bit of reflection,
Mm-hmm.
but as far as theoretical discussion,
Yeah.
and having different opinions on different things in that regard, not so much. But yeah, we did quite a bit of reflecting.
And to be honest with you, this is why, when we did that surviving your first year of teaching episode, I'd love to have Maegann, you back for another group of former students of mine that started teaching. I think some of the best advice I ever had was getting a mentor, like finding an older teacher to really watch after. I know in Muhlenberg County, you had a great mentor through there. Mr. Hoots was my mentor at Logan County those first couple of years. It makes a huge difference, because that's when you really have a person one-on-one to bounce, I guess, ethical situations out, and situations with parents, with students, and things that you never got really taught to deal with whenever you were doing your undergrad, that you really need that advice to follow on. Cody, over to you. I know it feels like I've asked you 1,000 times this question, but I think it's your 9th time this time, or 8, whatever it is. What did you think about I'll ask you something different. What did you think about doing something different this time, being involved in a 4 or 5 person roundtable? What did you think of doing this compared to other shows that you've done?
This was quite different, because obviously you had more opinions to bounce off of, but you also had a more diverse interval of perspective. Miss Basham is historically inclined. Mr. Davis is more mathematically inclined. Mr. Simpson was I can't remember what he said.
I can't remember, Cody. I think he was more of a social studies and science background. But as an elementary teacher, you kind of have to teach 2 or 3 subjects, and he's done a little bit of everything over the years. So we'll just say elementary in a way.
But I was very happy to talk about all of that with you, and I was very happy to share my knowledge with all of you. But if it's all right, I'd like to share one more personal experience with you that I didn't get to share while we were. So, as you know, Mr. Malkinson, I was a singer throughout most of high school. Most notably, I sang "Sweet Caroline" in front of the entire school, and I won the spring assembly. And for a short time, I think you could consider me for a short time, I think you could consider me a celebrity at Logan County High School. But more than that, that contributed to my character. That contributed to the development of who I am today. And because of that competition, I was able to blossom into the person I am today, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm also very grateful to you for allowing me to share my ideas with Ms. Basham, Mr. Davis, Mr. Simpson, and sort of, I guess you could say, compete with you all in order to further my character development even more. So thank you for having me on again.
And Cody,
so it's your girlfriend.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait for her to listen to the episode. And again, one of these days we're going to finally get you two on the same episode together. But Cody, I appreciate it. Another compliment for you is that sometimes it can be a little bit apprehensive to have former students, especially ones like you that are younger as former students, because I think you're only 19 right now. So sometimes when I bring you on with older guests, I've had you debate with guys in their 40s before and stuff on here. But what I respect about you is you don't ever treat anybody different based on their age or what they or based on their sex or anything. You really do show respect, and you try to listen to everybody that comes on here. And I only hope that other younger former students of mine that come on, they model themselves after that too, because I think a lot of me, especially in our other guests, we all get something from you, but you get something from us. So you're saying that we help your character, but I hope you know that you're helping Nathan's character and Megan's character and mine. Even if on both sides it can be marginal at times, it's still there. It's still something that's different. So Cody, I appreciate that. Now, nonetheless, we're going to get to the end of the episode tonight. Our next episode's kind of coming up. We're going to do another roundtable discussion probably in 2 weeks or so. Next week, I plan on having 2 former students on to do the philosophy of songwriting, and that's going to be Jacqueline Batchelor and Maria Wells, both 2 former students of mine. I can't wait to get them on together. I think I found a day that works for both of them, and I'm looking forward to having them on there. And there's one more student I'm going to check on that I know does music, but I can't remember if they write music, because I know there's a lot of former students that play instruments, but do they also write their own songs? And Jacqueline and Maria both have done that and still do it. So I've always wanted to have them on here. For anybody that watches the show or listens to it, I had Jacqueline's sister on last month about the occupational therapy doctorate program, and that was Olivia Batchelor, another sister that I had as a former student in the past too. So it's a really cool way to kind of get that experience. I think at least one of those students, I can't remember, Nathan, if you had Jacqueline. I think that Jacqueline was at the school whenever you were still there. I can't remember for sure or not. But again, I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to future topics coming up. Just to build off of last night's episode, our next movie episode will be at the end of August, and we're going to be doing a very dark movie that maybe Cody has seen. I don't know about the other ones on there, but it's called A Clockwork Orange. It's a very dark film. It's very psychologically driven, and we're going to start picking apart some of Stanley Kubrick's famous films. So other than that, it's been a great night. As always, please keep your eyes and your mind open and be contagious. Have a great night.